So today we're going to talk a little bit about a lot about trust, actually, and specifically the zero trust paradigm, why that's important, and why PKI services are critical to a zero trust paradigm. And then, of course, how the products and services that Aboutudra offers can facilitate that PKI for the zero trust environment. So we're probably well aware that in our hyper-connected world, we have a massive amount of exploits being attempted every day. The fantastic thing about being in the hyper-connected world is the convenience and the access to data. You know, everything's in our pocket, and access to massive amount of information in record time. That's on the good side. On the bad side, being in an environment where we are hyper-connected, you're also creating an environment where the attack surface for those who want to take advantage or potentially take advantage of us or disrupt business, etc., is also increased. And so with the added risk, we need to take some steps to ensure that we mitigate that risk as best as possible. Now, one of the strategies for doing that is something that's called zero trust. And there's not zero trust in zero trust, but it's more a declaration of the environment that you're working in is a zero trust environment. You know, in the old paradigm of doing things, we have a fort in the desert to protect us from things that might be outside. Anything that's inside the fort is safe, and anything that's outside the fort, we have potentially some concern about whether it's good for us or bad for us, and we want to let it come through the gate, and we can decide whether we want to trust it or not. You know, businesses under the old paradigm are the fort. Anything that was inside the business environment, infrastructure, was trusted, and anything outside was not. Well, the challenge that we have in our hyper-connected world is there's no wall around, there's no fort anymore, because, you know, our business is in our pocket, and so there is no area that you can connect. And so basically you're working in an environment where you have no safe or trusted space, which means that we need to have a strategy of authenticating every transaction that we do to ensure that it is secure. So that's where the zero trust comes in. We have an expectation that there is zero trust, and that requires that we should do authentication with whoever the other entity is at the end of our business transaction to make sure that we're dealing with who we expect to be dealing with. Now, the easy way of doing that is with passwords. So passwords are used to authenticate folks, but that is very much last century technology in terms of passwords. And so a challenge with a password is, you know, it doesn't necessarily have a good binding to the person who created the password, because it's easily shared and you don't know if it's been shared. If somebody has to use a password a lot, then they're going to use something that's easy for them. And if they use something that's easy for them, it's going to be easy to break. Also, if they have lots of different passwords that they have to remember, then they're going to start reusing passwords that they have in other places. And then if that's the same password that you use in your corporate environment, sure, you might have a strong password there, but if your corporate environment might have strong mechanisms for protecting that password when it's used or shared across an open public network like the internet. But if you use it in other contexts, the same password, maybe that environment that you're interacting with doesn't have good controls around protecting how you shared that password with them. And so if you've reused the password, then someone can break it in a different context and then compromise you in your corporate context. So passwords are just not a really good way. They're the baseline, but they're not a very good way of operating in a zero trust environment where you have to verify all the time who it is that you're dealing with. So one of the best ways of mitigating that risk is to go passwordless. And what technology do we have that allows us to be passwordless? Public key infrastructure is a really good way of doing that. Now, to give you some idea, you know, a standard password has around about 30 bits of entropy. You know, that's how much randomness is, and gives an indication of how much effort it would take to try and break a password and to compromise it independently. If you have a really, really strong password, maybe you could get up to 80 bits of entropy. And by strong password, we're talking like 16 characters, upper, lowercase, special characters, etc. Now, to give you some idea of how that would compare to public key infrastructure or a cryptographic key that is used in PKI, your baseline PKI of a 1024-bit RSA key has roughly about the same 80 bits of entropy as a strong password. However, what is currently recommended is around a 240-bit RSA key. And a 240-bit RSA key has like 112 bits of entropy, much, much stronger, which is equivalent of having, say, a 256 character password, uppercase, lowercase, and special characters, etc. Now, that's impractical, right? In a sense, if you're going to use a password that long, nobody's going to remember, let alone be able to type without mistakes a 256 character password. So it's far easier to use something like a cryptographic key that has a similar strength. And in fact, the current standards indicate that we should be using something like a 3072-bit RSA key, and that's about 128 bits of entropy, and we don't really have anything that can get near to breaking those types of security in real time. So this is why we want to use the PKI, where we can use a cryptographic key to give us the strength that is probably equivalent to hundreds of characters as a password, but it's available immediately and can be used immediately. So I'm just setting some context of why moving to passwordless is important and in the zero trust paradigm. I was at an RSA conference a few years ago, and the key speaker talked about, business occurs at the speed of trust. And I just found that to be an extremely interesting concept. And it is true because, and they gave plenty of evidence to show that when you have two entities who are wanting to engage in a business transaction, the point at which they engage is exactly the point at which they've decided to trust each other. So, we're in the business of enabling business. So we want to create environments of trust. And how do we do that? Well, first we have to understand what it is that we're trying to create. And my definition of trust, it's this confidence or assurance that we're dealing with a person or a thing or a system that will behave exactly as we expect, or alternatively, that it will behave in our best interests. Now, to create that environment, there are typically three elements that need to be present. The first is transparency. In other words, the entities that want to transact need to define and publish what the expected behavior is going to be for the transaction. Then there needs to be integrity, which means what they said they're going to do, they actually demonstrate that they have that behavior of doing exactly what they said they're going to do. And then finally, confidence. There needs to be some confidence because we can't define in advance everything or every scenario or situation that's going to come up, but there has to be some confidence that the two parties are actually acting in the best interests of each other or the community in which they're participating. So to create that environment of trust, you can't get there with technology alone. It's impossible. And it's more than just technology. So in my estimation, it requires, again, three aspects that need to be catered to. The technology and tokens used for trust is number one, and they definitely need to be there. But number two, in order to be transparent, to show what it is that they're going to do, there has to be policies that are published about how behavior is going to be measured, and also processes that implement how that, or that describe how those policies are going to be implemented. When those policies and procedures are published and audited, they can be evaluated to whether you want to actually trust this organization or not. But even having those policies and procedures along with the technology and tokens that have been implemented, that's still not sufficient either. There still needs to be the relationship established between the parties and an understanding of what the responsibilities are. We live in a world not where it's an if something is going to go wrong, it's a when something is going to go wrong. And so essentially it's more important that we have a strategy for recovery than a strategy that says we're going to keep ourselves immune from attacks. It's being able to respond to an attack that's really important. So understand what our responsibilities are in given situations and understanding the relationships that we're creating. When you combine that with policies and procedures around secure technologies and tokens, then you actually have an environment where you can create trust. One of the fantastic things about those three elements is they are naturally present in the public key infrastructure. And so that's why PKI is probably our best example of implementing a framework that establishes all the aspects needed for trust. So why, again, do we need that PKI? Again, going back to what I said earlier about passwords and how they're used to authenticate in a zero trust environment, because, you know, of cloud and mobile, etc. There is no network perimeter anymore, and there needs to be strong identification of every transaction that we're occurring. And if we're stuck on last century technology like passwords, it's going to be compromised more sooner than later. And so we need to move to something that's stronger, and a PKI provides exactly that. So identity is critical to a zero trust paradigm, being able to identify and then assign rights and manage those rights of individuals, etc., or services within the environment that you're operating. So really, when we talk about trust, having an identity bound to a token, so we make sure that the right people have the access and the right access to the right information or the right resources in the right context, and that it can be continuously authenticated over time. And we want to create an environment where that exists with as little friction as possible. And like I said, if we're going to really use a strong identifier like a strong password, there's no way somebody's typing in 256 characters of a password. So something like a PKI credential establishes that immediately, stronger than anything that we could typically or practically manage from a PKI perspective, or from a password perspective, I should say. So that brings us to IMRA and the set of services that we offer in terms to facilitate PKI solutions that enable this identification, strong identification and management of identity and access in an online world. There are more or less 3 services that are enabled with public key infrastructures. So you have, besides the identity and being able to subsequently having bound an identity to a cryptographic key, being able to use that identity to then authenticate and provide access to services. So that's one service. And then when you're going to do transaction across an open public network like the internet, say, where it's an environment that isn't necessarily trusted, you need some way of protecting that channel. So one of the advantages of using, again, cryptographic keys is to ensure that there is a tunnel, an encrypted tunnel, to ensure privacy between the two parties and to make sure that only those two parties are the ones that are transacting. And then sometimes what the nature of that transaction has to create documents for perpetuity, that where authorizations to do certain things are maintained over time, and to be able to do that electronically, something that would facilitate electronic signatures is something that would do that. And so that's another thing that public key infrastructure provides. So with those 3 services, you more or less have the full toolkit that you need to enable transactions to occur in a trusted manner. And so having something that implements a PKI, besides the identity piece that I talk about, gives you these other sets of tools as well, creates an environment to really enable not just the trust that's necessary in a zero trust environment, but also a number of tools that can be utilized to bring business benefits to the transactions that are actually occurring. And so what are the set of services that we have that enable this? We start with our MCA suite. So the CA suite is the suite that creates or manages the creation of PKI credentials, so creation of cryptographic keys, validation of identities that are bound to those cryptographic keys, and then issuing a certificate that says, you know, this key belongs to this particular entity, whether it's an individual or a service or a device, it doesn't matter. So that's essentially the purpose of the CA, and a CA is really what manages a public key infrastructure. But if we then want to use that for other things like authorization and then utilize the keys that were created, you need an environment that can manage PKI keys and be able to provide maybe a single sign-on or access rights and controls to services, etc. And so this is where our EMAS products or set of services come into play. And then finally, you're never, or I should say finally, the next step is once you create keys and certificates for entities within a trust environment, it's never just creation at the beginning and that's it. You actually have to be able to manage them over time. So you've got to create them, you've got to be able to validate them during their lifetime, and then have to be able to destroy them and replace them and update them on a regular basis. So you need more or less what's called a certificate lifecycle management, and our CertiNext set of services actually provides that set of services. But not only that, one of the great things about the CertiNext set of products and services, it also provides discovery function. So you may come into an environment and you may not realize, but there is a lot of support, a lot of undercover PKI that happens already in systems and services that are deployed within an enterprise. They are PKI based already, and there may already be keys that are being used that you really don't know about. So one of the great things that CertiNext can do is help an organization discover what their set of keys are and bring them under management to make sure, A, that the keys are meeting whatever the policy requirements that are set, but typically to ensure that they're strong enough, that they're only used for a certain amount of time, because the longer you use a key, the greater the risk of compromise becomes. So you should set lifetimes, and to make sure that those key lifetimes are honored, and then to be able to provision and replace them with the right amount of time to ensure that there's no interruption to services. This is something that certificate lifecycle management capability provides, and our CertiNext set of products and services enables this. And then finally, for e-signatures, in order to not only create a electronic version or an analog of a written signature that we're mostly familiar with in our business transactions, to have an electronic version of that allows that will be trusted in various jurisdictions is critical, but also coupled with the ability to perform electronic signatures is the ability to specify who else is a part of the transaction and route the electronic document to where it needs to be, to the right people in the right order, to ensure that the appropriate authorizations are received. So having an e-signature platform with workflows, again, is critical to enable all of those sets of services that would enable business to occur in electronic format and basically allow any type of office or enterprise to move from a paper-based environment to a complete digital. So with these sets of products and services, enabling the digital identity with PKI provides a very powerful set of tools to enable all aspects of business, not just those that are sought within a zero trust paradigm. So if we look just a little bit briefly at what's under the covers of each of those four elements, again, as I said, the MCA Products, this is where you create a route. Could be a route for an enterprise, could be a route for a nation. You can operate a public key PKI infrastructure in a box, turnkey deployment of these types of services. You can provide cloud or mobile PKI deployments. You can manage the PKI from end to end, including Internet of Things. So there are a number of different flavors of certificates that can be facilitated. Sorry, let me just go back to that one. And then even public trust. So in the world of the internet, web-based services, etc., securing websites and making sure that they are an authentic source is something that is embedded into operating systems and browsers, and IMRA's roots are embedded in the operating systems and browsers, so that certificates issued through our public trust environment will be trusted by default anywhere you need to go, which is critical for enabling business. Going to the second suite of products there, which is the authentication suite. It provides secure online access. You have Obviously PKI-based authentication, but multi-factor, two-factor authentication, so stronger ways of authenticating to make sure that the services that are being provided are even more closely bound and can't be subverted easily. Providing single sign-on once, and have the ability to that authentication event to migrate through the customer's journey with the organization without having to do it over and over again, to manage the identity and access in terms of which resources and which individual or services should have access to those resources. Again, mobile PKI deployments, protecting your data at rest in transit to ensure that it's secure from a confidentiality perspective, and only those who should have access to it do. And then again, where you get into an environment where you have a lot of devices that now are communicating using open public networks, to be able to secure those channels and securely allow those devices within IoT to be able to participate in a set of business transactions in a secure way. Then we move on to 3, CertaNext. As I said before, this is the lifecycle management. So it builds on what MCA provides. It allows you to manage keys and certificates, to discover where they are, and then to be able to manage their lifecycle to their creation, using MCA or other CAs if necessary, because it can be plugged into a number of different CAs and manage different. Doesn't have to be the IMRA set of products and services, and then be able to ensure that the right key sizes are being used for the right amount of time, and then replaced at the appropriate amount of time without allowing any interruptions to services. And then finally, M server. I think we talked a little bit about that already. So in terms of some use cases and where, once you have this powerful suite of services, where you can use them, an example would be VPN access. So if somebody wants to come into your organization and have come in from outside the network boundaries of your organization and want to be able to interact as if they were inside your network boundaries, you can create a tunnel using PKIs. That's what the virtual private network is. And then the MCA can provision those credentials, and CertaNext makes sure that those credentials are managed and available for your users, so that over time they're rotated, the keys are rotated when they need to be, and that they always have availability to be able to create that secure tunnel, and then ensure that privacy occurs only within the confines of that secure tunnel. Web application access, again, this may depend on some of our public trust routes in operating systems and browsers, but we can do things like connect to a website, or maybe download a form and digitally sign a form, etc. There are plenty of banking use cases, and we'll talk a little bit about some of them later on. And then being able to create the authorizations from end to end, using digital assets, so that you have a completely paperless office, and then you can use EMAS to determine how those assets are going to be distributed, used over time. And then again, talking about just securing data in transit, data at rest. Again, CertaNext is great for determining what keys may already be available in an enterprise, and then managing those over time. So where does that leave IMRA? Well, the great thing about IMRA, we're a one-stop shop. Basically, we have all the products and services that you might need to facilitate the zero trust environment, and all the sets of services for trusted business transactions that sit on top of that. We have plenty of street cred in terms of where we are currently being deployed, where our expertise is being leveraged, and recognition for contributions that we are making to the digital trust landscape on a global basis. For instance, we have a solution with a bank, a major bank in India, for instance, where over 500 million users basically protected in their authentication for their transactions. We are utilised in defence forces, e-passports for governments, smart cities, etc. We're recognised by Gartner and IDC as well for the products and services that we have. We have the broadest range of products and services in the commercial CA space. And I can say that with confidence because, you know, I have worked for, well, IMRA is probably commercial CA number 6 or 7 for me over my many years of working in this industry. And I can say with much confidence that the breadth of the set of products and services that IMRA has is better than everybody else, bar none. And the comprehensive services are not static either. They're constantly being improved and providing access and better access for our customers to be able to facilitate the trust in the transactions. A brief touch on how an enterprise-wide private key and certificate management solution was used by a bank in India. You know, this bank is probably one of India's largest, 22,000 branches, 65,000 ATMs, etc. They have the full product portfolio of banking services, etc. They wanted to improve their customer service. They have over 500 million daily digital banking users, transactions occurring. And so in a very diverse set of places that it's organized around the world. And they had, well, how do we secure this? How can we ensure that we are providing the best possible environment to ensure that trusted transactions can occur? So we installed and configured an enterprise-wide CLM solution, so Certinext, and the CA there helped them discover and manage all of the keys and certificates that they already had across their entire network, and then help them transition from a password-based authentication system to password-less with PKI in a zero trust environment. You may ask a little bit about who IMRA is. We said that we would get to this, and maybe I'll come back to this at the end, but you know, IMRA has been around for 15 years, which is a long time in this business, and has been providing quality products and services across a broad range over that period. We can go through this life cycle a little bit later because I'd like to give some time to Rajesh to maybe give a demo of one of our products, the MCA platform. And speaking of which, I think at this point, Rajesh, I might have you maybe give a demonstration. I'll just give a brief overview of MCA. It's both a document signing and workflow, and then the ability to store those documents in a number of different places that meets enterprise needs. And it can be deployed completely as a service from the cloud. It can be in your own dedicated cloud, or we can deploy it on-prem. In terms of support for integrating with applications, there are a lot of connectors that are already built for standardized enterprise applications like SharePoint, SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, etc. They have a number, and if you have something that's outside of that in your general workflow of your organization, we have REST APIs also to enable integration that way as well. What it essentially means is by utilizing something like the MCA platform, you can enable a workflow, a digital signing aspect from end to end and completely move away from paper whatsoever. And then there are a number of user interfaces that can be utilized. You can be connected through your standard Office 365 or Active Directory authorization, or you can use the PKIs that we were talking about earlier individually outside of that as well. And we can facilitate signing at all levels, whether they're a simple signature, an advanced signature, or something that's a qualified signature that typically has the same legal veracity as a wedding signature would, etc. I'm not going to talk about too much where we play at this point because I want to give some time for Rajesh to perhaps give a demo, but we'll come back towards the end after Rajesh's demo and maybe talk a little bit about some of these use cases. I can say that, you know, mSigner has been deployed in a large number of banking clients for various services. And to give you a brief one use case that I do want to cover before I hand over to Rajesh is customer workflow about onboarding. The typical customer journey for onboarding somebody and allowing them to execute one of the products or services with the bank. Typically, it's a long process with many steps. When you're dealing with some combination of paper and digital transactions, we're typically finding it's a large number of steps, like a 6-step process. It's several weeks to onboard a customer. One of the great advantages of moving to something that's entirely paperless and something that has legal representation and recognition within the jurisdiction in which you're operating with the use of mSigner, you can shorten that down to a much shorter process, and optimization of up to 80%, and just a few steps, and onboard customers much faster, with a much more streamlined and ease of use experience online. So I think with that, I'll leave those differentiators up of mSigner here about why we think mSigner is perhaps a good thing to share, and I'll hand over to Rajesh to give maybe a demo of a practical demo of some of the interfaces and capabilities of mSigner at this point.